Hello, I'm with Associate Professor Svitlana Matviyenko from Simon Fraser University, who's also doing a fellowship here at the New Institute at the same time as me. Thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of this Academic Freedom Series talk. And I wanted to ask you, Svitlana, about your own experience, starting in Ukraine and then going to Canada and the United States, doing 2 PhDs nonetheless. And what do you think about, and now being in Germany, what do you think about academic freedom generally? What do you think about academic freedom around the world? Where do we stand now in terms of academic freedom?
Yeah, the question, which is at the same time big and small, and I should also probably need to say thank you for having me here. It really makes sense to start with the biography, with this little introduction, because it also identifies my position as someone who speaks from a particular space, from the particular academic space as well. Mm-hmm. So I would say, as a tenured professor in Canada, you do feel very protected. Mm-hmm. And that's why I really feel like academic freedom works for me. Because now we definitely live in this moment in the world where academic freedom as a value of liberal education, let's say, is definitely kind of loses its solidity, loses its quality. And there are a lot of reasons for this, but I probably wanted to begin precisely with this positionality in terms of time and space, right? So I'm protected by a particular university, let's say, right? So, and now I'm speaking also here in the New Institute, right? So, and I do sense also with this particular protection, because academic freedom has to do with certain protection, right? So certain trust to the institution where you speak about something like this. But also, of course, it's a constant labor. So for me, academic freedom is not something that's just given by the institution. Otherwise, it would have been a little too much of a top-down kind of thing, right? So academic freedom is a value that everyone individually, but also collectively, labor towards. Right? So, and I decidedly use this word labor, right? So not work, not something else, but labor, just like it is understood in critical theory. Something that you cannot not do. Maybe you don't want to, maybe you're tired, maybe you're actually afraid, but you have to labor towards that. You have to do kind of something extra. Something that endangers you, maybe, or close to that, or something that requires an extra effort. But then you work towards this, you keep this value as a value. So maybe it is very abstract, and maybe you will have some other questions, but yeah.
It's not abstract. I mean, I understand what, how you say that we have to work towards it. But on the other hand, I think you're again putting the pressure on the individual, on the academic, him or herself or themselves, and to again do another type of labor, So are we so much indebted to ourselves or the society or the university or the sector or the discipline or whatever you call it, in terms of doing this much of labor? Cannot we have academic freedom without working so hard towards it, or laboring, or sweating towards it?
Well, I think we will not. I actually think we will not, because it is a collaborative effort. So this value should be maintained by different parties. So that's why I do mention institution, because institution in the end is a more powerful actor, right? So at the level of the states, for example, or even kind of world or whatnot. But also there is certain work of a community and of individuals. And it is because, again, academic freedom is not something that, like even the reason we're having this conversation, because you're not satisfied with certain definitions that you can read on like Wikipedia or some other, etc. So there are definitions, and you're still asking us, so what is it?
Exactly here I would like to interject, and maybe, I would like to invite you to talk about yourself and your experience. You've done your BA and MA in Ukraine. Then you went to the US for your first PhD, and then you did another PhD in Canada. So you have actually been through, different. Not completely different, maybe similar, but in completely different political situations, in completely different, universities probably. I would assume that your universities in Ukraine would probably be much more different than your university in Canada in terms of at least the size. Can you ponder a little bit about your own experience and if you stayed in Ukraine and now you were living in Ukraine, for example, how would you have liked it to have been, or how would you have envisioned it to be?
Yeah, indeed. I did have an experience, and I continue having experiences of speaking to publics, local and global, from different points of the world. And that's precisely, I will come to the comparison between all of them, but what I also noticed, and I think it is very important, especially today, in this, world where we move so much, right? So what's interesting in relation to academic freedom is that we are all with those data subjects. I don't want to say that we are global subjects, right? Because it's another myth. Actually, we are data subjects. We are very much citizens of particular country or countries, and then we are employees of some other institutions. So in a certain way, right? So we have to exercise academic freedom on this very strange intersection of different powers, right? So it's no longer about just one country. It's about all this complex intersection, and then you move around. So what you say here suddenly endangers you in some other place, right? So how do we maintain with this academic freedom? So, and in the past, it was very much localized, right? So it was always just the question whether it is some totalitarian government, for instance, stops your speech, right? But if you move, you also sense something like almost sense censorship, because suddenly you are not even fully aware or understand what kind of dangers you encounter when you move around. And so that's why academic freedom specifically, that's why it's a so important value, because it comes with this protection and negotiation with the institution, how certain institution can protect you, how can it rescue you if something happens, right? So, and how it actually, shows the appreciation of your expertise. So I did see different examples in different parts of the world, of course. Ukraine always surprises me, right? So despite that so many conversations and debates that I have in my country about certain political matters and so on, it surprises me by how even in this the most dangerous moment, right? So in war, people are still free to critique the government. I don't know if anyone ever can actually say this, but in Ukraine, you can critique the government roughly in the moment of this full-scale war. And you can do it as an academic, or you can do it as a non-academic, right? So it's Ukraine surprises me as with this absolutely free country, and this is not because people feel protection. In fact, it's actually just what the appreciation, the value of freedom, how high it is in Ukraine. So I saw some examples in Canada, and maybe I can give an example which is not a good example of academic freedom, but it shows how it works, right? So for example, I'm not going to name the professor, but it's a very famous case, and if someone just follows like this little story, even if they didn't know about that case, they probably will find a lot about it online. So we have also a tenured professor who several years ago made lots of kind of very controversial claims, doubting the introduction of gender pronouns. So, and obviously there was like huge discussion, like far-right was on the rise, and definitely he immediately became like the spokesman of, you know, this far-right, conservative and whatnot. And so, and for everyone else, the discussion was so completely crazy, unethical and whatnot. But what somehow with this person, right, so despite all the antagonisms and in fact harm that his claims and kind of, you know, social media mobilization and, you know, like giving the volume of those claims, right? So it became like such an issue, some break in the community, but at the same time, he was protected by academic freedom. And that's probably one, you know, for me, before that, I must say, because I'm still on the like early stage of my academic career, and that time I was just joining the university. So, and that was for me a kind of interesting situation, right? So I witnessed with this extremely problematic situation, but I actually saw how that thing works in action, right? So what kind of protection someone can expect and etc. So of course it's saddening very much that things like this also, you know, protected, nobody loses their job and stuff like that. But at the same time, that's what we can also say about democracy, right? So we have Trump elected in this, right? So it's a democratic election, right? So, and again, we can question many things about democracy and free speech and whatnot, but this is the same thing, right? So it's a value as a particular practice, not because it is good or bad, but it's a particular system that creates the space where, you know, certain things can be said, but they also can be questioned, right? So the idea is that it doesn't, it creates a discussion, right? So it allows for this and for that opinion. And then we discuss, we show expertise, we produce certain critiques, and we move somewhere.
So one of the things you are also highlighting is actually, and in that professor's case, for example, the one that you gave as an example, it also kind of feels like free speech. So would you be willing to make us a distinction between free speech and academic freedom?
Yes, absolutely. And this is a very important distinction because, again, free speech is an extremely broad concept, right? So definitely some argue that it stops, like the limit of this free speech is pain, is violence, is coercion, or something like this, right? So that's where free speech stops. That's where you cannot hurt anyone, and that's where you should stop speaking, etc. But even with that, it's a huge, a kind of, you know, almost undefinable thing. And academic freedom is very different from that. And it's not only even just my opinion, there is a whole kind of big discussion, for instance, in North America on academic freedom. I'm sure here as well. So academic freedom needs free speech. It has to be the context. It has to be the thing in society happening, right? So, but academic freedom is the speech that relies on expertise, professional expertise, right? So you cannot be just saying something like one professor about some natural hierarchies of this and that if science today shows us quite the opposite, right? So that's why it's very questionable even case, but again, right? So it relies on expertise, it relies on data. The whole point of it is just to be able to publish your data. That, right? So if you're using right methodology, if you are conducting your research ethically and whatnot, if the selection of observance of the circumstances that you're analyzing ethnographically or otherwise is, you know, professionally organized, right? So you achieve certain data. And then that's where it comes to the question of academic freedom, that in some different circumstances, academics may ask whether they can publish this data, whether they can speak about something that they found out in their research. And what not being able to do this, that precisely shows us the limit of academic freedom. If someone found out something but cannot speak about it, cannot publish, cannot teach. So this is precisely.
And they have to, it's enough that they ask themselves, actually, you know.
I mean, yeah, I mean, exactly. So that's where the question of self-censorship comes,
exactly.
right? So we spoke about with this individual who moves around, who constantly is the subject of different power structures, right? So how self-censorship and your global presence, right? So coexist. And it's a very complex thing. We don't want to even go into this, but this is definitely an issue.
So universities being hierarchical spaces since their foundation. Expertise having its own hierarchy over, you know, common knowledge. And also, I mean, the times that we live in now, like people getting fired because of their, you know, because of their thoughts about a certain, you know, political event, or people exercising their self-censorship to get funding for their research. People going into different types of research just because that research is actually better funded. Professors going into the classrooms and trying to be, you know, very personable to students so that their, you know, quality reviews are going to be stellar, so that they can get better jobs, new jobs, or they can continue working. So these are all aspects of, I think, academic freedom that, you know, comes to mind. And there are, you know, so many different obstacles in front of us as academics, as human beings, as citizens. So how do you think we can overcome these obstacles? Of course, we are going to work for it. Of course, we are going to, you know, do the labor so that we can improve our own well-being as intellectuals, but also, you know, serve the community in the way that we were supposed to serve. But also, like, is there anything else that we can do, maybe collectively as academics, or individually as intellectuals, so as to improve the academic freedom around, you know, first for ourselves and then around the world?
I mean, this is also, of course, very extremely difficult, right? So there are a couple of things that I see can be done, managed on the individual and communal level, right? So I mentioned already how, you know, institution represented by administration and the community are actually parts of the system, and there should be a communication. So community is what I am part of the community, right? So here and there and etc. So a community is someone who also, in a certain way, keeps accountable, right? So the administration. And in the world where we live in, for a variety of reasons that you mentioned, all sort of different types of scarcity and whatnot, right? So there is like this competitive mindset, right? So competitive mindset, I think it is very important to be aware of this, right? So maybe there is someone else who deserves something more than you, right? So how do you give place to someone else? Are you from a privileged circumstances or country or class or whatnot, right? So first of all, the personal question of ethics in terms of the distribution of resources and things like this. But then, like, speaking about certain things that limits the way how and why certain results of the research can be shown to the public, especially now when we live in the situation of the, let's say, capitalist university, right? So what it means that the university is also competing within different institutions, and it tends to make very problematic and questionable alliances with, let's say, corporate sector or military, right? So, or even, let's say, platforms, right? So, and in the end, it feels like very lucrative in terms of resources, but then in the end, what precisely you experience is the limit of academic freedom, right? So there is always certain people who gave money who are not happy with you saying this and that and etc. So the community must be constantly in conversation with the administrative part of the university to make sure we don't make these alliances. In my university, in Simon Fraser, things are far from perfect, but we constantly interfere. It's like a constant everyday situation of fighting, interfering, having us heard, sometimes not heard, but it's a process. So I saw how it works. It works. So, but it didn't work some time ago, but it works now. So even within this 10 years that I'm there, things change tremendously. But then at the same time, I feel like it's extremely problematic with this alliance and, advertising itself, like the pushing academic discussion through, for example, social platforms, because they are precisely capitalist platforms that are driven by clicks, clickbait, and stuff like that, right? So, like, the figure of Kim Kardashian would be always more important than bombing in Syria. Always, right? So it will be always more popular. So aligning with these platforms, for example, using them as a major communicative device means that you immediately bury certain important claims. It just works by the system. So for me, it is very important. And for instance, in Simon Fraser, just not like even the whole university. And again, today university is this whole big infrastructure composed by many different parts. Each of them has different ethical orientations and things like this. But I must say that in the School of Communication where I am, so we started finally departing from Facebook and Twitter. So we're not going to be there, right? So we're still a little bit there, but we are departing from them because we noticed one kind of, strange thing, that whenever some progressive research, like on gender issues, for instance, or something else is published, so what it drives, it actually drives bots and haters. So in the end, a professor who does an extremely important work gets targeted instead of, certain popularization of research, right? So and then you see, like, I mean, how do we support that academic freedom? How do we create space for them to say, right? So if we do it in this way, but also, again, so it's interesting, after Trump's first victory, one Stanford law professor, Nathaniel Parsley, raised a question that really remains resonant for me for years and years. And he asked whether democracy would survive the internet, right? Exactly. So, and whether academic freedom would survive the internet. This is a real question, and I think certain decisions can be done on the level of programs, on the level of universities, in terms of how we communicate our research to the publics. Because as we see, and as you mentioned, lots of time in our conversations and here in your questions, right? So we live in the world where like this non-expert opinion suddenly becomes, more attractive, more interesting as a data object to run through the networks, right? So, and it creates a huge problem.
I mean, all you say actually basically raises in me the question of what is really freedom for this internet age type of thing. But let's keep that for another interview. And I would like to thank you so much for thinking with me and sharing your thoughts about academic freedom. So thank you, Svitlana.
Thank you so much.